Imagine waking up before sunrise knowing exactly what day it is, not because of a calendar, not because someone reminded you, but because your own body did. There are no pharmacies, no pads, no tampons, no painkillers, no running water, no bathrooms, no spare clothes waiting in a drawer. And yet, before the sun climbs over the horizon, you still have to fetch water from a river, grind grain into flour, gather firewood, prepare food, care for children, or spend hours working in the fields. Your period has started, and there is no such thing as taking the day off. For hundreds of thousands of years, this wasn't an unusual situation. It was simply life. Generation after generation, women experienced menstruation long before modern medicine, disposable hygiene products, or even written history existed. Somehow, they adapted. Somehow, they found solutions. And somehow, humanity continued to grow. It's remarkable when you think about it. History books devote countless pages to kings, emperors, wars, and famous battles. We know how Roman soldiers built roads. We know how Egyptian engineers raised pyramids. We know what Viking warriors carried into battle. Yet one of the most universal experiences in human history, something that affected roughly half of the population, was barely recorded at all. Not because it wasn't important, but because the people writing history usually weren't the ones experiencing it. For centuries, menstruation remained hidden in the margins of history. Sometimes it was considered sacred, sometimes dangerous, sometimes embarrassing, often all three at once. As a result, what women actually experienced was rarely documented in their own words. Instead, historians have had to piece together the story from archaeology, medical texts, surviving artifacts, and the traditions that communities quietly passed from one generation to the next. And when those pieces finally come together, they reveal something surprising. The story isn't primarily about discomfort. It's about ingenuity. It's about resilience. It's about millions of ordinary women solving an ordinary problem without expecting history to remember them. But before we explore ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, and civilizations across the world, there's one enormous misconception we need to clear up first. Most people assume ancient women experienced menstruation almost exactly the way women do today. Every month, year after year, for decades, it seems obvious, but biology tells a very different story. A woman living 10,000 years ago probably experienced far fewer menstrual cycles during her lifetime than the average woman today. The reason has nothing to do with evolution changing the female body. It has everything to do with how people lived. Girls often reached puberty later because nutrition was very different. Women frequently became pregnant at younger ages. Many spent years breastfeeding each child. Extended breastfeeding naturally suppresses ovulation for long periods. Without ovulation, there is no menstrual cycle. Across a lifetime, repeated pregnancies and long periods of nursing dramatically reduce the total number of periods a woman experienced. Some researchers estimate that women living in prehistoric societies may have experienced only a fraction of the menstrual cycles common in industrialized societies today. That doesn't mean menstruation was easier. Far from it. Every cycle still required preparation. Every cycle still arrived without modern conveniences. But it does remind us that we shouldn't automatically project today's lifestyle backward into the ancient world. History often looks familiar from a distance. Only when we move closer do we begin to notice how different everyday life really was. One of the earliest civilizations to leave behind written medical records was ancient Egypt. And unlike many societies that followed, the Egyptians approached menstruation with a surprisingly practical attitude. The famous Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, contains detailed medical observations about women's health. It isn't a diary. It doesn't tell us what an ordinary woman felt during her period. But it does tell us something important. Menstruation wasn't ignored. It was recognized as a normal part of life that deserved medical attention. Archaeologists believe Egyptian women most likely used softened papyrus, or strips of linen, to absorb menstrual blood. Papyrus wasn't chosen because it was luxurious. It was chosen because it was everywhere. The Nile supplied enormous quantities of the plant. Once processed, it became flexible enough for many everyday uses. Linen was another practical solution. Made from flax, it was durable, washable, and already used throughout Egyptian society for clothing and household textiles. Rather than inventing something completely new, women adapted materials that already surrounded them. It's a pattern we'll see again and again throughout history. People rarely waited for perfect technology. They solved problems using what they had. Perhaps even more fascinating was the cultural attitude surrounding menstruation. Ancient Egypt associated many aspects of womanhood with fertility, renewal, and the natural rhythms of life. The annual flooding of the Nile brought fresh soil that sustained the civilization. Life itself depended on repeating cycles. To many Egyptians, the female body reflected those same patterns. Menstruation wasn't universally celebrated, but neither was it automatically treated as shameful or dangerous. Compared with many later civilizations, Egyptian women appear to have experienced relatively few ritual restrictions, simply because they were menstruating. Then history took a dramatic turn. If Egypt often approached the female body with practicality, ancient Greece approached it with philosophy, and sometimes, philosophy wandered very far away from reality. The Greeks gave the world extraordinary achievements: democracy, geometry, the foundations of Western science. Yet when it came to understanding menstruation, some of their greatest thinkers reached conclusions that seem astonishing today. Aristotle believed that menstrual blood was essentially unfinished reproductive material. Within his understanding of biology, men and women shared similar processes, but women's bodies were thought to be colder and less capable of completing them. To modern readers, the theory sounds bizarre, but for centuries, it shaped medical thinking throughout much of the Western world. Ideas matter, especially when they come from respected authorities. Fortunately, everyday women didn't rely entirely on philosophical theories to manage everyday life. Historians believe Greek women commonly used soft wool because sheep farming was widespread throughout the region. Wool absorbed moisture reasonably well, was reusable, and could be fashioned into simple pads or other absorbent materials. Some historical sources also describe linen cloth secured by belts around the waist. None of these solutions were glamorous. None resembled modern menstrual products, but they were practical. More importantly, they reflected an important truth that repeats throughout history. Women often solved problems long before society fully understood them. While philosophers debated theories inside academies, mothers quietly passed practical knowledge to daughters, one generation teaching the next. Not through famous books, not through royal decrees, but through daily experience. That invisible chain of knowledge may have been one of the greatest technologies ancient women ever possessed. If you're enjoying uncovering the forgotten stories history rarely tells, subscribe to Human Stories. Every week, we explore the science, history, and everyday lives that shaped our world, revealing the remarkable human experiences hidden behind the civilizations we thought we already knew. Let's travel west to ancient Rome, where engineering transformed cities, laws shaped empires, and public baths became symbols of civilization. Yet beneath all that progress, myths about menstruation flourished. One of the most influential voices belonged to Pliny the Elder, a Roman scholar whose enormous encyclopedia attempted to explain nearly everything in the natural world. His writings claimed that a menstruating woman could spoil crops, sour wine, rust metal, drive dogs mad, and even influence the weather. To us, those ideas sound almost unbelievable, but they remind us of something important. People don't always fear what they understand. Sometimes they fear what they cannot explain. Fortunately, ordinary Roman women still had to live in the real world. Whether philosophers approved or not, life continued. Children needed raising. Markets needed visiting. Meals needed cooking. Historians believe Roman women most commonly relied on soft cloth, wool, and in some regions, natural sea sponges. These materials could be washed, reused, and adapted according to a family's resources. And that introduces another forgotten reality. Not every woman experienced history the same way. A wealthy Roman household could afford fine linen and servants to wash reusable cloth. A poor family often depended on worn fabric that had already served many other purposes before becoming menstrual cloth. Technology wasn't always the greatest divide. Wealth was, but physical materials were only one part of the story. Across much of the ancient world, culture often shaped women's lives far more than cloth or wool ever could. Many societies viewed menstruation through religious traditions. Some described it as a period of ritual impurity. Others viewed it as a time of unusual spiritual power. Ancient Jewish law introduced detailed rules surrounding ritual purity. Certain Hindu traditions placed temporary restrictions on daily activities. Some indigenous cultures across North America welcomed menstruating women into moon lodges, places where they spent time apart from everyday community life. Modern readers often assume these practices were simply forms of punishment. History is rarely that simple. In some cultures, separation reflected fear. In others, respect. In still others, both ideas existed at the same time. The meaning depended entirely on the culture. One lesson becomes clear again and again. The same biological event could produce completely different social experiences depending on what people believed. Then came medieval Europe. Popular culture often imagines the Middle Ages as dirty, primitive, and hopelessly uncomfortable. Reality was more complicated. Most women simply continued working. Fields still needed tending. Bread still needed baking. Families still depended on them. For many ordinary women, reusable cloth remained the most practical solution. Dark outer garments also helped conceal stains during everyday labor. Meanwhile, medieval medicine inherited many ideas from ancient Greece and Rome. Doctors believed menstruation helped remove excess blood from the body. If a woman's period stopped unexpectedly, physicians frequently prescribed herbs believed to encourage menstrual flow. What's remarkable is that some of those herbs are still studied today. Plants like ginger, chamomile, and fennel contain compounds that modern science recognizes as having measurable physiological effects. Ancient people didn't understand hormones, but through centuries of observation, many communities gradually discovered which plants actually helped relieve discomfort. Knowledge accumulated one generation at a time, not inside universities, inside kitchens, gardens, and conversations between mothers and daughters. While Europe followed one path, China developed another. Traditional Chinese medicine treated menstruation not as an isolated event but as an important indicator of overall health. Physicians carefully observed timing, flow, color, and consistency. These details were believed to reveal the balance of the entire body. Practical solutions evolved alongside medical knowledge. Women commonly used reusable cloth made from cotton or silk depending on their family's wealth. Some garments were specifically designed to hold absorbent material securely in place. At the same time, herbal formulas were carefully refined to reduce discomfort and regulate menstrual cycles. Many of those traditions continue to influence Chinese medicine today. History becomes more difficult to reconstruct when we reach many indigenous civilizations throughout the Americas, not because these societies lacked knowledge, but because colonization destroyed enormous amounts of written and oral history. Archaeologists believe Aztec women likely used absorbent fibers from the maguey plant, while many indigenous nations developed their own locally adapted solutions using available plants, fibers, mosses, or cloth. Much of that knowledge disappeared before historians ever recorded it. That may be one of the greatest tragedies surrounding this subject. Entire generations of women's practical experience simply vanished from the historical record. Then, surprisingly, one of the biggest changes arrived only a little more than a century ago. Disposable menstrual pads feel like ancient technology because they've existed throughout our entire lives. Historically speaking, they're almost brand new. The first commercial disposable pads appeared in the late 19th century. Even then, they struggled to succeed. Many women felt embarrassed purchasing them in public. Store clerks were often men. Advertising avoided direct language. Only during the 20th century did changing attitudes gradually make menstrual products easier to buy and discuss openly. When viewed across the entire span of human history, modern disposable products occupy only the final few pages. Everything before that depended on creativity, reuse, adaptation, and shared knowledge. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. Many people assume ancient women simply suffered in silence because they lacked technology. But history suggests something very different. They possessed technology. It just looked different. It wasn't manufactured in factories. It wasn't wrapped in plastic. It wasn't advertised on television. It lived inside families, inside traditions, inside experience. Every mother teaching her daughter, every older sister helping her younger sister, every community gradually improving solutions through countless generations. That knowledge kept civilizations functioning. Empires rose and fell. Dynasties changed. Borders moved. Wars reshaped continents. Yet every month, ordinary women quietly solved the same practical problem, allowing everyday life to continue. Perhaps that's why this story matters. Not because it's shocking, not because it's uncomfortable, but because it reminds us how incomplete history can become when only certain voices are preserved. We remember emperors. We remember generals. We remember monuments built from stone. But civilizations were also sustained by millions of invisible acts of resilience that never received their own chapter. If stories like this help you see history from an entirely new perspective, subscribe to Human Stories. Every week, we uncover the forgotten experiences, hidden science, and remarkable people who quietly shaped our world in ways history rarely celebrates. The next time someone says history is only about kings and battles, remember this. Every civilization that ever existed depended on ordinary women navigating extraordinary challenges with intelligence, creativity, and resilience. Their names may have been forgotten, but their knowledge never truly disappeared. It survived through daughters, through communities, through generations, and in many ways, it helped carry humanity itself forward. Thank you for watching Human Stories. We'll see you in the next journey into the forgotten stories of our past.